grew up in a good Christian home, 2 parents, an older brother, 2 younger sisters, and I was accepted the Lord and baptized at age 15, and for whatever reason, soon after that, I became involved in a relationship that was very unhealthy for me and caused me to make a lot of bad choices that led me down a path of honestly just deep sin in my life. And the struggle was knowing that I had accepted Christ, and yet I was still making those choices, and I knew that I was disappointing everyone around me at the same time. But that scripture that says the pleasures of sin for a season, it was like I wanted to just stay in that. I didn't know, honestly, how to get out of it exactly. I was afraid to tell what I was doing and how I was living. So eventually all of that came to light, and my parents, my pastors, and my friends, they all helped me recognize my sin, and we kind of just worked through it as best I think that everybody knew how at the time. It was, when you're addressed with something like what I was going through, maybe you're kind of shocked that you find out somebody's living that lifestyle, and then because how I looked on the outside didn't match what was going on the inside at all. And so we dealt with it. And yet in the back of my mind, I knew that it was kind of like I was carrying this backpack, and everything that didn't get resolved or dealt with, all my feelings or emotions, because that relationship was just severed at the time, it was all stuffed in that backpack, and I just kept carrying that. And over the years, things got added to it and shoved down inside, and I just carried that around. So I really thought that once I met Marcus and I was in a really good relationship with him, and we got married, we started a family, and we lived in California, 2,300 miles away from Ohio, where all of that had happened. I just thought that all those things that I had dealt with in my past would just go away. And unfortunately, that did not happen. And things came up in our relationship, and Mark and I's relationship, that really was a struggle for us in our marriage. And instead of turning to Jesus, I turned back to those things that I'd struggled with. I started pulling things out of this backpack because I was comfortable there. And the most devastating choice that I could have made at that time, and just took me clear back to where I was when I was 16, 17 years old. And through a Bible study at our church that I was attending at that time, I met a lady who said and shared that her husband was a family therapist, and I knew they were Christian people, and so I called her one night and just said, I was to the point where I was sick of living the way I was living, and I was dealing with depression and not going to church, and I couldn't talk to anybody. I didn't know who to talk to about it. You don't want to just spew it out to just anyone. And the one thing that I really struggled with was forgiving myself for hurting all these people around me, especially my husband and my children and my parents. And then I also really struggled with accepting God's forgiveness. I just couldn't think that He would really forgive me for going back to that sin after I thought it was resolved and all of that. I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. And I'll never forget one session I was feeling like just really broken. And he leaned forward and looked me straight in the eye and said, "Autumn, do you know how valuable you are to God?" And in that moment, it was like that wall just came crumbling down. And I felt Jesus so tangible in that room in that moment. And I sank to, I was sitting on a couch just like this, and I just sank to the floor and just began weeping. I've never done it before. I'd never done it since in that way. And shortly after that, I read the story about the woman in Luke who came to Jesus when he was at the Pharisee's house for a lunch. And she begins weeping. And she was known as a sinful woman in that time. And she begins washing Jesus' feet with her tears and wiping his feet with her hair. And I felt like with Jesus so tangible in that room at that moment, that was me finally accepting God's forgiveness. And he says to her, he looks her in the eyes and says, well, everybody's condemning her around her. And he looks her in the eyes and says, I forgive you, go in peace. You are forgiven. And that was my moment in Luke. That I love that story because that is my redemption at that moment. You know, it's hard to look at that and think, you regret a lot of things, but I also think of that verse in Corinthians that says that God will comfort us in our struggle so that someday we might be able to comfort someone else in their struggle. And so I hope that God can use me in that way sometime, and I just pray that He will be able to use me in a way that He used other people to minister to me in that way. My name is Autumn Root, and I am light.